The wagon hit another frozen rut, and Rosalie Mercer's teeth slammed together hard enough to taste copper. Her hands clutched her swollen belly. 8 months gone, the baby pressing against her ribs like it knew what was coming. The wind, screaming through the mountain pass, didn't care. The men driving the wagon didn't care either. "Stop here," Gideon Mercer said from the driver's bench. His voice cut through the storm like a blade through rotted cloth. The wagon jerked to a halt. Snow swirled in violent eddies, turning the world into shifting walls of white and gray. Rosalie tried to sit up, her breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged the air before vanishing. "Gideon, please." "Get out!" She stared at the back of his head, at the hat pulled low against the wind, at the rigid set of his shoulders. This was her brother-in-law, her husband's older brother, the man who'd stood at Thomas's graveside 3 weeks ago with his hat over his heart, promising to look after family. "It's a blizzard," Rosalie said, her voice cracked. "I can't." "You can, and you will." Gideon climbed down from the bench, his boots crunching in the snow. Behind him, his hired man, a rail-thin ranch hand named Cully with nervous eyes, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Rosalie's fingers dug into the wagon's splintered wood. The baby. That baby's got no claim to Mercer land. Gideon yanked back the canvas covering the wagon bed. Ice crystals had formed on the fabric, and they shattered as he moved. "Thomas died before you could give him a son. That makes the ranch mine by right. You and whatever comes out of you are extra mouths, and I won't feed extras through a winter this mean." The cold air hit Rosalie's face like a fist. She tried to speak, but her lungs seized. The altitude, the fear, the impossible weight of understanding that this wasn't an argument she could win. "Gideon, for the love of—" "Don't." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not tight enough to bruise, but hard enough to pull her toward the edge of the wagon bed. "Don't beg. It's pathetic, and it won't change facts." Rosalie's boots hit the snow. The cold shot up through her thin soles immediately, a vicious ache that promised frostbite if she stayed still too long. She stumbled, caught herself against the wagon wheel. "You can't leave me here," she said, not begging, stating fact. "I'll die." Gideon pulled a small cloth bundle from his coat and tossed it at her feet. It landed with a muffled thump in the snow. "There's jerky and hardtack, maybe 3 days' worth if you stretch it. Town's 15 miles northeast if you can find the pass." He glanced up at the sky, where the storm raged without mercy. "But I'd say you've got maybe an hour before this gets worse." "I'm pregnant," I noticed. Gideon climbed back onto the wagon bench. Cully still hadn't moved, still hadn't said a word. "You got 2 choices, Rosalie. Die here quick, or die somewhere I don't have to see it. Makes no difference to me, but it'll make sleeping easier if I'm not the one holding the shovel." The wagon lurched forward. Snow sprayed from the wheels. "Wait!" Rosalie lunged after it, her boots sliding on the icy ground. "Gideon, please!" But the wagon was already disappearing into the storm, swallowed by curtains of white that closed like a fist. The sound of hoofbeats and creaking wood faded fast, replaced by the howl of wind through the canyon. Rosalie stood alone in the middle of the mountain pass, surrounded by wilderness that stretched in every direction without mercy. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that stuck to her eyelashes and melted against her freezing skin. She looked down at the cloth bundle. 3 days of food, 15 miles to town. An hour before the storm got worse, and a baby kicking inside her that didn't understand any of it. Molt, 2 weeks earlier. The funeral had been brief. Thomas Mercer died when a half-broken Mustang threw him into a fence post, snapping his neck clean. The ranch foreman said he was dead before he hit the ground, which was supposed to be a comfort, but wasn't. Rosalie stood at the graveside in a black dress that didn't fit anymore, her belly straining against the fabric. The preacher spoke words she didn't hear. The wind carried them away before they could mean anything. Gideon stood across from her, his face carved from stone. He was older than Thomas by 5 years, harder by a lifetime. Where Thomas had laughed easily and loved without hesitation, Gideon moved through the world like a man expecting ambush. After the burial, after the neighbors left with their casseroles and condolences, Gideon found Rosalie in the ranch house kitchen. "We need to talk about arrangements," he said. Rosalie was washing dishes, Thomas's coffee cup, the plate he'd used that last morning. Her hands moved without thought. "What arrangements?" The ranch, the land. What happens now? She set the cup down carefully. Thomas left a will. He did. Gideon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Says the ranch goes to his heir, but there's no heir yet, is there? There will be. Maybe. Gideon's eyes dropped to her belly, then back to her face. And maybe it's a girl. Girls don't inherit cattle ranches in this territory, Rosalie. You know that. She knew. The law was clear, even if it was brutal. Without a son, without a male heir, the property would default to the next male relation, which meant Gideon. So what are you saying? I'm saying you'll have a place here as long as you need it, but after the baby comes, we'll need to revisit things. He pushed off the doorframe, moved toward the door. Winter's coming hard. Ranch can't support dead weight. Dead weight. The word hung in the air long after he left. Rosalie pressed her hands against the kitchen table, felt the solid wood beneath her palms. Thomas had built this table. He'd cut the lumber himself, shaped it, sanded it smooth. She could still see his hands moving across the surface, could still hear him laughing when she'd caught a splinter. We'll be fine, she whispered to the empty room. We'll figure it out. But the storm clouds gathering on the horizon suggested otherwise. Present, the mountain pass. Rosalie's fingers were going numb. She'd been walking for what felt like hours, but the sun's position, hidden behind the storm, made time impossible to track. The bundle of food was tucked inside her coat, pressed against her belly. The baby hadn't moved in a while, and that terrified her more than the cold. 15 miles northeast. But which direction was northeast when everything looked the same? Snow-covered rocks, ice-laden trees, the mountain pass twisting back on itself like a snake. Her boot caught on something, a root, a rock, she couldn't tell. And she went down hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs. For a moment she just lay there, face pressed against the snow, the cold seeping through every layer of clothing. Get up. Her hands pushed against the ground. Her knees followed. But when she tried to stand, a contraction seized her abdomen. Not labor, not yet, but a warning, a promise of what was coming. Not now, she gasped. Please, not now. The baby kicked once, hard, a tiny fist or foot hammering against her ribs. I know, Rosalie thought. I'm scared too. She forced herself forward. One step, another. The wind tore at her coat, found every gap in the fabric, every place where warmth tried to hide. Her breath came in ragged clouds that the storm ripped apart. A tree appeared out of the white, a massive pine, its branches heavy with snow. Rosalie stumbled toward it, pressing her back against the trunk. The bark was rough even through her coat, but it blocked some of the wind. She pulled out the cloth bundle with shaking hands. Inside, 4 pieces of jerky, hard as leather, 6 pieces of hardtack, each the size of her palm, and nothing else. No flint, no matches, no blanket. Gideon had sent her to die. Not with a bullet, that would have been too obvious, too much like murder, but with winter. Let the mountain do the killing. Let the cold take the blame. Rosalie bit into the jerky, forced herself to chew. It tasted like salt and ashes. She made herself swallow, made herself take another bite. The baby needed food. She needed strength. But when she looked out at the storm, at the endless white that surrounded her on all sides, strength felt like a fantasy. 4 years earlier. Before Thomas, Rosalie had grown up in a mining town called Copperhead, 3 days south of the territory line. Her father worked underground 16 hours a day. Her mother took in washing. Neither of them expected her to become anything more than a wife to another miner, a mother to children who'd grow up covered in coal dust. But Rosalie had learned to read, taught herself from newspapers left at the boarding house, from the few books the town preacher kept in his office. She devoured words the way other girls devoured sweets. And words, she'd discovered, were the only thing that couldn't be taken from her. When the cholera came through Copperhead, it took her mother first, then her father a week later. Rosalie was 17, alone, with nothing but a small trunk of possessions and a desperate need to be anywhere else. She'd worked her way north, taking jobs as a cook, a seamstress, whatever paid enough to keep moving. That's how she'd ended up in the territory, working at a trading post on the edge of the frontier. And that's where she'd met Thomas Mercer. He'd come in for supplies, rope and salt and coffee beans. He'd smiled at her, and it wasn't the smile men usually gave. No hidden calculation, no assessment of what she might be worth. Just kindness. They'd married 3 months later in a ceremony so simple it was barely legal. Thomas brought her to the ranch, showed her the land he'd built with his own hands, promised her a life better than the one she'd left behind. For 3 years, that promise had been true. Hard, yes. Lonely sometimes. But true. Then the horse had kicked, the fence post had shattered, and Rosalie had learned that promises meant nothing when men like Gideon decided otherwise. Present, the mountain pass. The light was fading. Rosalie could feel it more than see it, the way the storm's whiteness shifted toward gray, the way the cold deepened from painful to lethal. She'd been walking for hours, maybe 6, maybe more. Her feet were beyond numb now, just distant weights at the ends of her legs that occasionally obeyed commands. The bundle of food was empty. She'd eaten the last piece of hardtack an hour ago, forced it down, even though her stomach had threatened to reject it. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. She doubled over, gasping, waiting for it to pass. When it finally released her, she straightened slowly. The baby's coming. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. Too soon. Just hold on, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse from the cold. Please, just hold on a little longer. The wind answered with a howl that sounded almost human. Rosalie pushed forward. The landscape had changed, the pass narrowing into a canyon, rock walls rising on either side. Maybe this was good. Maybe the canyon would lead somewhere. Maybe... Her boots slipped on ice hidden beneath fresh snow. This time when she fell, she didn't have the strength to catch herself. She hit the ground hard, rolled, came to rest against something solid. A boulder. Ice-covered and massive. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. The cold had settled deep into her muscles, into her bones. Her body was shutting down, prioritizing the baby over everything else. Get up. She couldn't. You have to. She couldn't. Rosalie pressed her cheek against the snow. It wasn't as cold as she'd expected. Almost comfortable. Like a pillow. Like rest. The baby kicked weakly. I'm sorry, Rosalie whispered. I'm so sorry. She closed her eyes. The horse appeared first, a massive bay with a white star on its forehead, moving through the storm like a ghost. Then came the rider. Rosalie saw him through half-frozen eyelashes, through vision that had narrowed to a tunnel. A man in a long coat, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf wrapped against the cold. He pulled the horse to a stop a few feet from where she lay. For a long moment, he just looked at her, assessing. Then he dismounted, his movements economical and deliberate. When he crouched beside her, she could see his face, scarred across the left cheek, weathered by years of hard living, with eyes that gave away nothing. You picked a hell of a place to die, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel being dragged across metal. Rosalie tried to speak, but only a croak came out. The man's eyes moved from her face to her belly, and something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. You alone? She managed a nod. Anyone coming for you? She shook her head. The man stood, looked back the way she'd come, then down the canyon ahead, making calculations. Then he looked at the sky, at the storm that showed no signs of stopping. Can you ride? Rosalie tried to sit up, failed, tried again. This time she made it halfway before her body gave out. Without warning, the man bent and lifted her, one arm under her knees, one behind her back. He carried her to the horse with the same efficiency he'd used to dismount, like she weighed nothing. Hold the saddle horn, he said, lifting her onto the horse's back. Fall off, and I won't come back for you. He swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to steady her. The horse started moving before Rosalie could process what was happening. Who? She started. Quiet, the man said. Save your strength. They rode into the storm, the canyon walls rising around them like the ribs of some massive beast. Rosalie drifted in and out of consciousness, held upright only by the man's arm and the rhythm of the horse's gait. Once she thought she heard him speaking, low words she couldn't quite make out, instructions to the horse maybe, or prayers, or curses. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her completely was the sound of a door opening, the sudden absence of wind, and the man's voice saying something that might have been, "Don't die on me yet." The cabin consciousness returned in pieces. Warmth first, real warmth, the kind that came from fire and walls and a roof overhead. Then sound. Wood crackling, wind howling outside, but distant now, muffled. Then smell, smoke, leather, something cooking. Rosalie opened her eyes. She was lying on a narrow bed in a room barely bigger than a cell. The walls were rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. A single window, shuttered tight, a door that led deeper into the cabin. And everywhere, signs of violence carefully organized. Rifles on the wall, 2 of them, well-maintained. A gun belt hanging from a peg, the holster worn smooth. Knives in various sizes, a bow with a quiver of arrows, steel traps stacked in the corner, and on the small table beside the bed, a revolver within easy reach. The baby kicked, and Rosalie's hand flew to her belly. Still there, still moving. "It's awake," the man's voice said from the doorway. Rosalie turned her head. He stood there with a tin cup in one hand, studying her with the same assessing look he'd given her in the snow. "You've been out for 6 hours," he said. "Longer than I expected." "Where—" Her throat felt like sandpaper. He crossed to the bed, held out the cup. "Drink." It was water, cold, clear, and the best thing Rosalie had ever tasted. She drank half before he took the cup back. "Where am I?" she managed. "My cabin, north ridge of the canyon." "How far from—" "Far enough." He set the cup on the table. "Storm's still going. Nothing moves until it breaks." Rosalie tried to sit up. The man didn't help, just watched as she struggled upright, her back against the rough wall. "You have a name?" she asked. "Silas." "I'm Rosalie." He nodded once, like her name was a piece of information to file away. Nothing more. "Thank you," she said, "for—" "Don't." Silas moved toward the door. "I'm not a good man doing a good thing. I found you, brought you here, that's all. When the storm breaks, you leave. I'm 8 months pregnant." "I noticed." "I can't— Not my problem." But he stopped in the doorway, his back to her. "Who left you in the pass?" Rosalie's jaw tightened. "My brother-in-law." "He want you dead?" "What do you think?" Silas turned his head slightly, not quite looking at her. "I think you're in a situation that ends one of 2 ways, and neither of them are pretty." "He wants the ranch," Rosalie said. The words came out flat, drained of emotion. "My husband died. I'm pregnant. If I have a boy, the land stays mine. If I have a girl, or if I die before giving birth, everything goes to Gideon. So he threw you to the wolves. He threw me to the winter." Silas was quiet for a moment, then, "Smart. Winters kill more people out here than bullets do, and nobody asks questions about a woman who got lost in a storm." "Except I didn't get lost." "No," Silas agreed. "You got murdered, just taking a while to finish." He disappeared into the other room. Rosalie heard the clank of metal, the scrape of a pot. After a few minutes, he returned with a bowl of something that smelled like heaven, venison stew, thick with meat and root vegetables. "Eat slow," he said, handing it to her. "Your stomach's been empty too long. Eat fast, it'll come right back up." Rosalie took the bowl with shaking hands. The first spoonful made her want to weep. The second made the baby kick enthusiastically. "What happens when the storm breaks?" she asked between bites. Silas settled into a chair near the door, positioned, she noticed, where he could see both the window and the interior of the cabin. "I told you, you leave." "And go where?" "Town. Find a marshal. Tell him your brother-in-law tried to kill you." "You think the marshal will care?" Silas's expression didn't change. "No." "Then what's the point?" "There isn't one." He pulled out a knife and a piece of wood, began carving with practiced ease. "But staying here isn't an option. I don't do charity, I don't do company, and I sure as hell don't do pregnant women." "Why not?" The knife paused for just a fraction of a second, then continued its work. "Because they die anyway." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with history Rosalie didn't understand. "I won't die," she said. "They all say that." "I mean it. Silas looked up, his scarred face unreadable. So did they. That night, Rosalie couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the wagon pulling away, saw Gideon's back disappearing into the storm, saw herself lying in the snow, waiting to die. She should be dead. By every measure of luck and probability, she should have frozen hours before Silas found her. But she hadn't. Something, fate, chance, stubborn refusal, had kept her alive long enough to be found. The question was, now what? Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. Inside, the fire burned low but steady. And across the small cabin, Silas sat in his chair by the door, carving his piece of wood in silence. "Do you ever sleep?" Rosalie asked. "When it's safe." "It's not safe now?" "It's never safe." The knife moved steadily, shaving away thin curls of wood. "Men learn that, or they die young." "What about women?" "Women too. Just takes them longer to figure it out." Rosalie pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. "How long have you been up here?" 4 years. "Alone?" "That's the idea." "Why?" The knife stopped. Silas looked at her directly, and there was something in his eyes that made her wish she hadn't asked. "Because the world decided I was better off alone. And turns out they were right." I don't care what you think." He went back to his carving. "In 2 days, maybe 3, the storm breaks. You'll be strong enough to ride by then. I'll take you to the ridge where the trail splits. From there, it's a straight shot to town. 5 miles, maybe 6. Even pregnant, you can make that. And then? And then you're not my problem anymore." Rosalie stared at the scarred stranger who'd saved her life but refused to claim credit for it. A man who lived surrounded by weapons, who carved wood in the dark while watching doors that no one but him seemed to think needed watching. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. Silas didn't answer for a long time. The only sounds were the knife against wood, the fire crackling, the wind screaming outside. Finally, "Because I was riding past. Because you were dying. Because I'm not a good man, but I'm not that man anymore." He looked up. "Don't make it more than it is." "But it is more." "To you, maybe. Not to me." Rosalie wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her with hands made of lead. Her eyes drifted shut despite her best efforts. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Silas's voice, so quiet she might have imagined it. "Just don't die here. That's all I ask." But, Dawn, day 2. Rosalie woke to find Silas gone and breakfast waiting on the small table. More stew, a piece of dried bread, and water in a clean cup. She ate slowly, like he'd instructed, and felt strength returning to her limbs in incremental measures. The cabin in daylight was even smaller than she'd thought. One main room with the bed, table, and chair. A smaller room beyond, probably where Silas slept, though the door was closed. And everywhere, that sense of controlled violence. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. She managed to stand, testing her legs. They held. Barely, but they held. The front door opened, and Silas entered in a gust of cold air and snow. He carried firewood under one arm and had snow crusted in his hair and beard. "Storm's still going," he said, dumping the wood by the fireplace. "Another day at least." "I can help," Rosalie offered. "No, you can't." "I can. You can sit, you can eat, you can rest." Silas hung his coat on a peg. "That's all you can do, and all you should do." "I'm not helpless." "Didn't say you were. Said you're pregnant and half dead from exposure." He built up the fire with efficient movements. "There's a difference." Rosalie lowered herself back onto the bed. "How long have you been awake?" "Long enough." "Do you ever give a straight answer?" "When there's reason to." She found herself almost smiling despite everything. "You're difficult. You're nosy. I'm curious, there's a difference." Silas glanced at her, and for just a moment, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the same careful blankness. "Rest," he said. "You're going to need it." Outside the cabin, 15 miles south. Gideon Mercer sat in the trading post, nursing his third whiskey and trying to ignore the sick feeling in his gut. She should be dead by now. The storm had been going for 2 days, No one survived that long in the pass without shelter, without supplies. The cold would have taken her in hours, but he kept seeing her face when he'd pulled her out of the wagon. Not angry, not even scared, just resigned, like she'd known this was coming. Cully sat across from him, equally silent. The hired man had barely spoken since they'd come down from the mountain. "You think?" Cully started. "Don't," Gideon cut him off. "Don't think, don't talk, just drink and forget." "But if she's dead." Gideon slammed his glass on the table. "The storm killed her, natural causes. That's the story. That's the only story." Cully nodded, but his hand shook when he lifted his own glass. The trading post door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and a grizzled trapper covered in snow. "Hell of a storm," the trapper announced to the room at large. "Worst I've seen in 15 years. "Anyone caught in it?" Gideon asked, trying to sound casual. The trapper shook his head. "Not that I've heard, but then, who's fool enough to be in the pass during a blow like this?" Gideon didn't answer. Back at the cabin, night 2. Rosalie woke to voices. Low, but urgent. She kept her eyes closed, listening. "Not your concern." Silas's voice. "Everything in this canyon is my concern." A woman's voice, older, with an edge like broken glass. "And when I heard you brought someone up here, you heard wrong." "Did I?" The woman's footsteps moved closer to the bed. Rosalie felt eyes on her. "She looks half dead." "She was all the way dead when I found her. Still working on changing that." "Where'd you find her?" "The pass. Someone left her." A pause, then, "The pregnant one?" Rosalie's eyes snapped open. The woman standing over her was perhaps 60, with white hair pulled back and a face that had seen more than its share of violence. She carried herself like a person who expected trouble and wouldn't be surprised when it arrived. "You're awake," the woman said. "Good. I'm Mara. I live 2 ridges over, and I need to know if you're going to bring trouble to this canyon." "I don't want trouble," Rosalie said. "Nobody ever does. But you got left in the pass during a killing storm. That's not an accident." Mara crossed her arms. "So I'll ask again, what kind of trouble are you?" Rosalie sat up slowly. "The kind that comes from family who'd rather see me dead than share inheritance." Mara's eyes narrowed. "The Mercer Ranch? You know it?" "I know Gideon Mercer's a bastard with a reputation for solving problems permanent-like. You his sister-in-law?" "Widow." "Then you're the problem he solved." Mara turned to Silas. "She can't stay here." "I know that. And she can't go back down the mountain, not until we figure out what happens next." "Also know that. So what's your plan?" Silas looked at Rosalie, then back at Mara. "Don't have one yet." "Then you better get one. Because if Gideon thinks she survived, he'll come looking. And when he does, this whole canyon turns into a war zone." Mara moved toward the door. "I'll be back tomorrow. Have answers by then." She left without another word. Rosalie and Silas sat in silence for a long moment. "Who is she?" Rosalie finally asked. "Someone who survived her own set of men, thinking she'd be easier to bury than deal with." Silas added wood to the fire. "She's right, though. Gideon will come looking." "Then I need to leave." "And go where?" "Town's crawling with Gideon's people. Ranch is his now. You've got no money, no allies, and a baby that'll be here in a few weeks." Silas shook his head. "Running just makes you easier to catch." "So what do I do?" Silas was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "You survive," he finally said. "Whatever it takes. You survive." "How?" He looked at her then, and in his scarred face she saw something she hadn't expected. Understanding. "Same way I did," he said. "By being too stubborn to die when people wanted me dead." Outside, the storm howled its agreement, and somewhere in the valley below, Gideon Mercer sat up in bed, unable to shake the feeling that something had gone very, very wrong. The storm finally broke on the 3rd morning. Rosalie woke to silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of wind. For 2 days, the blizzard had screamed against the cabin walls like something alive and furious. Now it was just gone. Silas was already up, standing at the window with the shutter cracked open. Gray dawn light cut across his face, making the scar on his cheek look deeper than it was. How long until they come? Rosalie asked. He didn't turn around. 2 days, maybe 3 if we're lucky. You sound certain. I am. Silas closed the shutter, moved to the fireplace. Gideon thought the storm would finish what he started. When word spreads that it's past, he'll send someone to confirm you're dead. When they don't find a body, he'll know. Rosalie pulled herself upright, her back protesting. The baby had been restless all night, rolling and kicking like it sensed the tension in the air. And when he knows, he'll come himself, or send enough men that it doesn't matter. Silas poured something dark into 2 tin cups. Either way, this cabin becomes a problem that needs solving. Then I should leave, today. On what? Your feet? He handed her one of the cups, coffee, bitter and strong. You're stronger than you were, but you're not strong enough to make it to town. Not pregnant, not in this cold. Then what? You stay. I prepare. When they come, we deal with it. Rosalie stared at him over the rim of her cup. Why would you do that? You said yourself I'm not your problem. You're not. Silas drank his coffee in one long swallow. But men coming to my cabin with guns, that's my problem. Has been for 4 years. You're just the excuse this time. There's a difference between an excuse and a reason. Not from where I'm standing. Before Rosalie could respond, there was a knock at the door, 3 sharp raps, then silence. Silas's hand went to the revolver on his hip so fast Rosalie almost missed the movement. It's Mara! A voice called from outside. Put the gun down before you do something stupid. Silas opened the door. Mara stood there with a burlap sack slung over one shoulder and snow packed on her boots. She looked past Silas to Rosalie. You look less dead, Mara said. That's progress. Thank you? Wasn't a compliment. Just an observation. Mara pushed past Silas into the cabin, dropped the sack on the table. Brought supplies. Food, blankets, and something else you're going to need. She reached into the sack and pulled out a gun belt with a worn holster. Inside was a small revolver, the kind women carried in cities but rarely used. I don't know how to shoot, Rosalie said. Then you're going to learn. Mara set the gun belt on the table. Because if Gideon Mercer comes up here, being polite and pregnant won't save you. Lead might. Silas picked up the revolver, checked the chamber. It's old. So am I. Still works when it needs to. Mara turned to Rosalie. My husband gave me that 30 years ago. Told me a woman alone needed protection. He was right then. He's right now. Where is he? Rosalie asked. Your husband? Dead. 12 years. Mara's expression didn't change. Mining accident, they said. But men don't get crushed by cave-ins when the only tunnel that collapsed was the one they were standing in front of, not inside. The cabin went quiet. I'm sorry, Rosalie said softly. Don't be. I shot the foreman who did it 6 months later. Turns out being a widow makes you invisible, and invisible women can get real close before anyone notices the gun. Mara pulled out a chair, sat. Point is, you can't trust the law. You can't trust men like Gideon. All you can trust is that people will do what serves them, and killing you serves him. So what do I do? You learn to shoot. You learn to survive. And when the time comes, you make damn sure you're harder to kill than he expects. Silas set the revolver down. She's 8 months pregnant. I noticed. Still needs to know which end the bullets come out of. She can barely stand for more than an hour. Then she better learn fast because Gideon won't wait for her to feel better. Mara looked at Rosalie. You want to live? Yes. You want that baby to live? More than anything. Then stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like someone who refuses to die. Mara stood. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll start with basics. For now, just hold the gun. Get used to the weight. Feel how it sits in your hand. She left the same way she'd arrived, abruptly, without ceremony. Rosalie picked up the revolver. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold against her palm. The wooden grip was worn smooth from years of use, from hands that had held it in fear and determination. Will it really come to that? She asked. Shooting someone? Silas was putting wood on the fire, his back to her. Hope not, but hope's a poor strategy. What's a better one? He turned, and in the firelight his scarred face looked ancient. Being ready for the worst, then being grateful when it doesn't happen. Is that how you've survived? Always expecting the worst? No. Silas's voice dropped. I survived because the worst already happened. Everything after is just waiting. Before Rosalie could ask what he meant, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Where are you going? To set traps, not the kind for animals. He paused in the doorway. If you hear riders, 3 shots from that revolver means I'm dead. Hide under the floor. There's a space beneath the boards by the bed. Don't come out until you're certain they're gone. Then he was out the door, leaving Rosalie alone with the gun and the weight of understanding that death wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a certainty waiting to arrive. The morning dragged on. Rosalie tried to keep busy, tidying the cabin, eating the food Mara had brought, practicing holding the revolver the way she imagined someone confident would hold it. But mostly, she just sat by the window, watching the forest and trying not to imagine riders emerging from the trees. The baby kicked hard around midday and Rosalie pressed her hand against her belly. I know, she whispered. I'm scared too. But we're going to be okay. Somehow. The baby kicked again like it was arguing. When Silas returned hours later, his hands were dirty and his expression was darker than usual. He washed at the basin without speaking, then checked each weapon in the cabin methodically. How many did you set? Rosalie asked. Enough. He loaded a rifle, set it by the door. Wire traps in the approaches, bear trap by the north trail, scattered glass bottles along the ridge line. If they come at night, we'll hear them break. You've done this before. Different circumstances, same principle. Rosalie watched him work, watched the efficiency of someone who'd spent years preparing for violence. Mara said you've been alone for 4 years. What happened before that? Silas's hands paused on the rifle. Nothing that matters now. It matters if men are coming here because of me, and you're the only thing standing between them, and I rode with bad men. The words came out flat, like he'd said them before. Did bad things. Then I stopped. That's all you need to know. What kind of bad things? The kind you don't ask about. He looked at her directly. And if you're smart, you won't ask again. But Rosalie had spent 3 days watching this man, watching how he moved, how he thought, how he held violence in his hands like a familiar tool, but used it only when necessary. You're not a bad man, she said quietly. You don't know me. I know you saved my life when you didn't have to. I know you're protecting me when walking away would be easier. I know. You know nothing. Silas's voice cut through hers like a blade. I've killed men, more than I can count. I've robbed. I've burned. I've done things that would make you sick. The only reason I'm alive is because I was better at it than the people trying to stop me. Then why did you stop? The question hung between them. Silas turned away, stared at the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet Rosalie almost missed it. Because I got tired of seeing ghosts. That night, Rosalie lay awake listening to the cabin settle around her. Silas sat in his usual chair by the door, carving wood in the darkness. The rhythmic scrape of blade on pine was almost soothing. Can I ask you something? Rosalie said into the quiet. Can I stop you? Probably not. She heard what might have been a sigh. Ask. When you said you were tired of ghosts, did you mean the people you killed? The carving stopped. I meant the people I couldn't save. Before Rosalie could respond, Silas stood abruptly. Get some sleep. Tomorrow Mara comes back, and she's not patient with people who waste her time. He disappeared into the back room, and Rosalie was left alone with that sentence echoing in her mind. The people I couldn't save. Not the ones he'd killed, the ones he'd failed to protect. That, she thought, might be worse. The next morning brought Mara and a lesson in survival that had nothing to do with guns. Before you learn to shoot, Mara said, standing in the small clearing behind the cabin, you learn to not shoot yourself. Or me. Or Silas. Or anything you're not aiming at. She demonstrated how to hold the revolver, hands steady, elbows slightly bent, feet planted. Then she made Rosalie repeat it 20 times without ammunition. It feels wrong, Rosalie said, adjusting her stance for the 15th time. It should. You're pregnant and exhausted and terrified. Everything feels wrong. Mara corrected her grip. But wrong becomes right through repetition. Your body needs to remember this so when your brain's screaming, your hands still know what to do. They spent 3 hours on stance alone. By the time Mara finally let her stop, Rosalie's arms were shaking and the baby was protesting the whole affair with well-placed kicks. "Tomorrow we do it again," Mara said. "Then the day after. When your body stops fighting the position, we add bullets." "How long do we have?" Mara looked toward the valley, her weathered face unreadable. "Not long enough." That afternoon, while Rosalie rested and Silas checked his traps, Mara stayed behind to talk. "You know what you're doing?" she asked Silas when they were alone outside. "Never do." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got." Silas adjusted a wire trap, testing the tension. "She can't leave, can't stay, can't go back. That leaves fighting or dying. There's a third option." "What?" "You take her north, past the territorial line. Find her a place where Gideon's name means nothing." Silas straightened. "I don't run anymore." "This isn't running, it's surviving." "There's a difference." "You tell me." Mara crossed her arms. "Because from where I stand, that girl's got maybe a week before she goes into labor. And when she does, she's going to need more than a man with a gun and a death wish. She's going to need safety, real safety, the kind you can't provide here." "I'm not her protector." "No?" Mara's eyebrow rose. "Then what are you?" Silas didn't answer. "That's what I thought." Mara started down the trail toward her own cabin. "Figure it out, Silas. Because when Gideon comes, and he will come, you better know what you're protecting and why. Otherwise, you're just another body in the snow." After she left, Silas stood alone in the clearing, staring at nothing. Down in the valley, 15 miles south, Gideon Mercer was having problems of his own. "You're certain?" he asked the scout sitting across from him in the ranch house parlor. The man, a tracker named Pike with nervous eyes and dirt under his fingernails, nodded. "Storm's cleared. Rode up to the pass this morning. No body, no sign of her at all." Gideon's jaw tightened. "She could have gone off the trail, fallen into a ravine." "Could have, but there's horse tracks, Big Bay, heading north into the canyon." "Someone found her." "Looks like." Gideon stood, walked to the window. Outside, ranch hands moved through their routines, feeding cattle, mending fences, preparing for the spring thaw that would come eventually. His ranch now, his land, his legacy. Except it wasn't. Not while Rosalie lived. "Who's up in that canyon?" Gideon asked. Pike shifted uncomfortably. "Few folks. Mostly people who don't want to be found. There's Mara Yates, widow woman, keeps to herself. Some trappers come and go, and there's talk of someone else, man living alone on the North Ridge. Nobody knows much about him, but the trappers say he's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that used to ride with bad men, before he disappeared." Gideon turned from the window. "You have a name?" "Just stories, but they call him Boone." The name meant nothing to Gideon, but the description meant plenty. An outlaw. Someone outside the law's protection. Someone who could be killed without questions. "Get 6 men," Gideon said. "Good ones, not cowhands, men who know how to handle a gun. We leave tomorrow." "You sure about this?" Pike asked. "If she's with someone dangerous, then we'll be more dangerous." Gideon's voice went cold. "She's got no claim to this land, no right to that name, and I'll be damned if some pregnant widow and a mountain hermit stop what's already done." After Pike left, Gideon poured himself a drink and stared into the amber liquid. He should have put a bullet in her himself. Quick, clean, certain. But he'd been trying to be smart, trying to keep his hands clean. Now he'd have to get them dirty after all. Back at the cabin, Rosalie was learning that survival wasn't just about guns and courage. It was about the small things. How to bank a fire so it lasted through the night. How to melt snow for water without wasting fuel. How to stretch food supplies when you didn't know when more would come. Mara taught her these things with the same brusque efficiency she taught everything else. No wasted words. No coddling. Just information delivered like medicine. Bitter, but necessary. "Why are you helping me?" Rosalie asked during one of these lessons. Mara was showing her how to set a snare trap for rabbits. "Because someone helped me once. When I needed it. Figured I should pass it along." "Who helped you?" Doesn't matter, they're dead. Mara finished the knot, tested it. But before they died, they taught me something important. What? That being a woman doesn't mean being weak. It just means the world expects you to be, and there's power in refusing what people expect. Rosalie thought about that while she practiced the knot herself, her fingers clumsy with cold and exhaustion. I never wanted power, she said. I just wanted a life, a family, something simple. Simple's a fairy tale. Mara watched her work. Life's always complicated. You just get to choose which complications you can live with. That evening, Silas returned from checking the southern approaches with news that made everyone go quiet. Tracks, he said. 3 riders, stayed on the ridge, didn't come close, but they were watching. Scouts, Mara said immediately. Gideon's checking before he commits. How long? Rosalie asked. Silas looked at her, his scarred face grave. Day or 2. No more. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. I should leave, Rosalie said again, but her voice was hollow. They all knew she couldn't. You should prepare, Mara corrected. Tomorrow we move past stance. You learn to load, to aim, to fire. She looked at Silas. And you better decide right now if you're willing to kill for her, because half measures won't work. Not with Gideon. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the wall, took down one of the rifles, and began cleaning it with practiced hands. I've already decided, he said quietly. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Rosalie lay in the darkness, feeling the baby move inside her, wondering if she'd live long enough to see its face, wondering if Silas would die protecting someone he barely knew, wondering if Mara would lose another person she'd tried to save. You still awake? Silas's voice came from his chair by the door. Yes. Can't sleep? Would you? A long pause. Then, no. Rosalie sat up slowly, her back aching. In the dim firelight, she could just make out Silas's silhouette. Tell me something, she said. Something true. Like what? Why you really saved me. The real reason. Silas was quiet so long Rosalie thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, and his voice carried weight she hadn't heard before. 7 years ago, I rode with a gang, 12 of us. We hit banks, stages, supply trains, lived like kings for about 2 years. Then we hit a town called Bitter Creek. He stopped. Rosalie waited. There was a woman, Silas continued, pregnant, hiding in the general store when we came through. My partner, man named Crow, found her. Said she was a witness, said witnesses meant problems. His voice dropped. I told him to let her go. He didn't. I tried to stop him. I was too late. The cabin was silent except for the fire crackling. I killed Crow that night while he slept. Then I left, rode north, and didn't stop until I hit this canyon. Silas's silhouette shifted. So when I found you in the snow, pregnant and dying, I didn't really have a choice. I couldn't save her. Maybe I could save you. Rosalie felt tears on her cheeks, hot and unexpected. I'm sorry. Don't be. It doesn't change anything. He stood, moved toward the back room. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. But before he disappeared, Rosalie spoke again. Silas? He stopped. Thank you for telling me. Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this. I know, but still, thank you. He said nothing else, just disappeared into the darkness. And Rosalie sat alone, realizing that the man protecting her wasn't just running from his past. He was trying to redeem it. The morning of the 4th day brought cold clarity and Mara's promise. Today you shoot, Mara announced, leading Rosalie behind the cabin where they'd set up makeshift targets, old bottles on a fallen log, a piece of wood with charcoal marks. The revolver felt heavier with bullets in it. Rosalie's hands shook as she raised it. Don't fight the recoil, Mara instructed. Let it happen. The gun's going to kick. Your body needs to absorb it, not resist it. The first shot went wide, the bullet disappearing into the forest. The sound was enormous, echoing off the canyon walls. The baby jumped inside her. Again, Mara said. The second shot hit the log, just left of the bottles. Better, again. By the 10th shot, Rosalie's arms were screaming and her ears were ringing, but she'd hit 2 bottles and come close to a third. That'll do, Mara said. Not good, but better than nothing. Remember, in a fight, you're not trying to be fancy. You're trying to not die. Big difference. They were walking back to the cabin when Silas emerged from the tree line, moving fast. They're coming, he said. 6 riders, maybe 7. They'll be here by sunset. The world tilted. Rosalie grabbed the cabin wall to steady herself. How do you know? Mara asked. Found their camp, 2 miles south. They're gearing up now. Silas looked at Rosalie. This is it. Last chance to run. Run where? Rosalie's voice came out steadier than she felt. You said it yourself. There's nowhere left to go. Then we make our stand here. Mara checked her own gun, an ancient but well-maintained rifle. Silas, what's the plan? They'll come up the main trail. It's the only route that makes sense for horses. He pointed toward the canyon approach. I'll be in the trees on the south ridge. Mara, you take the north. Rosalie stays in the cabin with the rifle in clear sight of the door. What if they surround us? Rosalie asked. They won't. Not on the first pass. Gideon's careful. He'll try to talk first, see if he can solve this without losing men. Silas's face was grim. But when talking fails, and it will fail, things happen fast. Mara nodded. Then we better be ready for fast. The afternoon crawled by like something wounded. Rosalie sat by the window, rifle across her lap, watching the forest for movement. Silas had positioned her here because the cabin's thick log walls would stop most bullets, and the window gave her sightlines on 3 approaches. The baby had gone quiet, like it sensed the tension. Rosalie pressed her hand against her belly. I'm going to keep you safe, she whispered. Whatever it takes. I promise. Outside, the forest was still. Too still. Even the birds had gone quiet. Then she saw it. Movement at the tree line. A horse. Then another. Then 5 more. Gideon Mercer rode at the front, straight-backed and confident. Behind him came men Rosalie didn't recognize, all armed, all watching the cabin like it was a trap waiting to spring, which she supposed it was. Gideon raised his hand and the riders stopped just beyond rifle range. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Gideon called out, Rosalie, I know you're in there. She didn't answer. I'm not here to hurt you, I just want to talk. Still nothing. Gideon's voice hardened. You can't hide forever. That baby's coming soon. You really want to give birth in some outlaw's cabin in the mountains? From the trees came Silas's voice, steady and cold. You've said your piece, Mercer. Now leave. The riders shifted uneasily, trying to locate the source of the voice. Who the hell are you? Gideon demanded. Someone who doesn't like men who throw pregnant women into blizzards? That's family business. None of your concern. It became my concern when I found her dying in the snow. Gideon's jaw tightened. Even from the cabin window, Rosalie could see the calculation in his eyes. He'd come prepared for a fight, but not for someone who knew the terrain and had already established positions. She's got no legal claim to the Mercer Ranch, Gideon called out. Thomas died without an heir. That makes the property mine. So kill her in court, Silas replied. Not in the mountains. We both know courts take time. And money. And while they're deciding, my ranch falls apart. Gideon's voice took on an edge. I'm offering her a deal. She walks away now. I give her money. Enough to start somewhere new, somewhere far from here. How much? Rosalie called from the window before she could stop herself. Gideon turned toward the cabin, trying to spot her. $500. More than enough to get you to California and set up comfortable. And if I refuse? Then you die here. Might be today, might be tomorrow. But you'll die, and that baby will die. And everyone who tried to help you will die too. His voice went hard. I'm giving you a way out, Rosalie. Take it while it's offered. Mara's voice came from the opposite ridge, startling everyone. She's not interested in your blood money, Gideon. Gideon spun his horse, trying to track both voices. Who? Mara Yates. You remember me? Your foreman killed my husband 12 years back. I remember you at the inquest swearing it was an accident. The color drained from Gideon's face. So, forgive me, Mara continued, if I don't trust your promises. You've got history with killing people and calling it something else. One of Gideon's riders, a young man with red hair, leaned toward him and whispered something. Gideon nodded, then called out again. Last chance, Rosalie. Take the money and go. or deal with what comes next. Rosalie looked at the rifle in her lap, at the cabin around her, at the forest where Silas and Mara waited. Then she thought about Thomas, about the ranch they'd built together, about the baby moving inside her that deserved better than running forever from a man like Gideon. "No deal," she called back. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. Then Gideon's face went cold as winter. "Have it your way." He wheeled his horse around, and the riders followed. They disappeared into the trees, moving back down the trail. "Are they leaving?" Rosalie called out. "No," Silas's voice answered. "They're regrouping. They'll come back after dark." Rosalie's hands tightened on the rifle. It was going to be a long night. The sun dropped behind the western ridge, and with it went any illusion of safety. Shadows stretched across the canyon like grasping fingers, and the temperature plummeted fast enough that Rosalie could see her breath fogging the cabin's interior. Silas came back as the last light died, moving through the door so quietly she almost didn't hear him. His face was drawn tight, eyes scanning the darkness outside even as he closed and barred the entrance. "They've split up," he said. 3 coming from the south trail, the others circling to the north ridge. "They'll hit us from both sides." Mara appeared seconds later through the back entrance Rosalie hadn't known existed, a narrow gap between logs that Silas had cut years ago for exactly this purpose. The older woman's rifle was already in her hands, and there was something in her expression that reminded Rosalie of a wolf, cornered but not beaten. "Gideon's not with them," Mara said. "He's hanging back, letting his men do the work." "Smart," Silas said. "If it goes wrong, his hands stay clean. If it goes right, he still gets what he wants." "Which is me dead," Rosalie said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Which is you quiet." Silas moved to the window, peering out through a crack in the shutter. "Dead's just the easiest way to make that happen." A contraction hit. Not labor, not yet, but close enough that Rosalie had to grip the table edge and breathe through it. When it passed, she found both Silas and Mara staring at her. "How long?" Mara asked. "I don't know. Hours maybe. Could be longer." "Could be shorter," Mara said. "Babies come when they want to, not when it's convenient." Silas swore under his breath. "We need to end this fast. If those men get inside while you're in labor..." "They won't get inside." Rosalie picked up the rifle, checked it like Mara had taught her. "Because I'm not dying. Not tonight. Not like this." Something passed between them then, an understanding that went beyond words. They were 3 people who should have been dead already, 3 people the world had tried to bury, and if they were going down, it wouldn't be quietly. "Positions," Silas said. "Mara, north window. Rosalie, east. I'll take the south. They come in waves. We make them pay for every inch." "And if they rush us all at once?" Mara asked. "Then we shoot faster." The first bottle broke at 8:30. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the canyon, followed by muffled cursing. Someone had tripped one of Silas's warning traps on the south approach. "Here we go," Silas muttered. He'd positioned himself at the south-facing window with his rifle already aimed into the darkness. "Remember, don't shoot unless you've got a clear target. Bullets don't grow on trees." The next sound was worse. A scream, sudden and sharp, cut off almost immediately. Then the unmistakable sound of metal jaws slamming shut. "Bear trap," Mara said with grim satisfaction. "Someone just lost a leg." "Or their life," Silas added. "Depends on where it caught them." Rosalie's hands were shaking on the rifle. She'd fired a dozen practice shots that morning, but practice and reality were oceans apart. Out there in the darkness were men with guns coming to kill her. Men who'd probably never even met her but would pull the trigger anyway because Gideon paid them to. "I can't see anything," she whispered. "You will," Silas said. "They'll have to show themselves eventually. Can't shoot what you can't see either." A voice called from the darkness, one of Gideon's men, probably the one who'd tripped the glass. "Just send the woman out. Nobody else has to die tonight." Silas didn't respond. "We don't want trouble with you. This is between the Mercers, family business." Still nothing. "You're going to get yourself killed for someone else's widow? That makes sense to you?" Mara laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "More sense than dying for Gideon's money." "That you, Mara? Should have known." The voice took on an edge. "Your husband died because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. You want to follow him?" "My husband died because your boss is a murderer." Mara's rifle moved, tracking something in the darkness. But at least I'll die standing up instead of crawling like you. A muzzle flash lit up the tree line, there and gone in an instant. The bullet hit the cabin wall a foot from Mara's window, and she returned fire immediately. 2 shots, quick and controlled. A body hit the ground with a heavy thump. First blood, Mara said quietly. Then the forest erupted. Gunfire came from 3 directions at once, bullets hammering into the cabin walls like hail. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Rosalie dropped below the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. "Stay down!" Silas shouted over the roar. He was returning fire methodically, 1 shot every few seconds. "They're trying to flush us out. Don't give them a target." Another contraction hit, and Rosalie bit down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. Not now. Not during this. The baby needed to wait, just a few more hours, just until— "East window!" Mara's voice cut through the gunfire. 2 men moving up! Rosalie forced herself up, rifle barrel resting on the windowsill. In the moonlight filtering through the clouds, she could just make out 2 shapes moving between the trees. They were being careful, using cover, but they were definitely advancing. "Shoot when they break cover," Silas called. "Don't think, just do it." The 2 shapes separated. One moved left toward the cabin's blind spot. The other rushed forward, sprinting across open ground toward the door. Rosalie pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard into her shoulder, and for a second she couldn't see anything through the smoke. When it cleared, the running man was down, clutching his leg and screaming. "Good shot," Mara said. "Now the other one." But the second man had already reached the cabin wall, pressed flat against it where the windows couldn't reach him. Rosalie could hear him breathing on the other side of the logs, could hear him checking his weapon. "He's going to try the door," Silas said. He was already moving, crossing the cabin in 3 long strides. He positioned himself behind a heavy table he'd upended for cover, rifle aimed at the entrance. The door shuddered. Once. Twice. On the 3rd impact, the bar cracked. "Stubborn," Silas muttered. Then louder. "Last chance to walk away." The response was another kick. The bar split. The door swung inward. The man who'd been shoulder-charging it stumbled into the cabin, off balance and surprised to find himself face to face with Silas's rifle. "Oh," he started. Silas shot him in the chest. The man fell backward out the door, landing in a heap on the threshold. For a moment there was silence, shocked and complete. Then someone in the darkness started shouting orders, and the gunfire resumed with renewed fury. "Close the door!" Mara yelled. Silas kicked the body clear and slammed what was left of the door shut. The bar was broken, so he jammed the table against it instead. Bullets punched through the wood, sending splinters flying. Rosalie reloaded with shaking hands, trying to remember everything Mara had taught her. Bullets in, cylinder closed, hammer back. Don't think, just do it. Another man appeared at the east window, this one smarter, staying in cover and firing blind. His shots went wide, but they kept Rosalie pinned. "Can't get an angle," she called. "Don't need to." Mara shifted her position, aimed through a gap in the north wall's chinking. "Got him." Her rifle spoke once. The firing from the east window stopped. "How many left?" Rosalie asked. She was breathing hard now, the contractions coming closer together, maybe an hour apart, maybe less. 3, Silas said. He was reloading, his movements automatic. "Maybe 4 if the one you hit can still shoot." "And Gideon?" "Still hanging back." Silas's jaw tightened, waiting to see how this plays out. A new voice called from the darkness, younger than the others, scared beneath the bravado. "You killed Jimmy and Rourke. This ain't worth it. We're leaving." "Don't you dare," another voice, older and angrier. "Gideon's paying us to finish this." "Gideon's not the one getting shot at." The argument continued, loud enough that Rosalie could track the speakers. They were arguing near the south ridge, maybe 50 yards out. She caught Silas's eye and pointed. He nodded. "When they break," he whispered, "we end it." The argument reached a crescendo. Then came the sound of footsteps, running, retreating. "They're bolting," Mara said. 2 men broke from cover, running south down the trail. Silas tracked them with his rifle, but didn't fire. "Let them go," he said. "They're done." But the older voice wasn't done. "Cowards! All of you!" He stepped into the moonlight, a big man with a scarred face and a shotgun in his hands. He was looking at the retreating men, not the cabin. Mara's rifle centered on his back. "Don't," Rosalie said suddenly. "He's not looking at us." "He's still a threat. He's leaving." But the man turned then, and his eyes found the cabin. Found the broken door, and the bodies, and the smoke still drifting from the windows. His face went through several expressions: anger, resignation, something that might have been relief. "Hell with this," he said. Then he threw the shotgun into the snow and walked away, hands raised. They watched him disappear into the darkness, watched the forest settle, watched the gun smoke drift away on the wind. "Is it over?" Rosalie asked. Silas was already moving toward the door. "No, Gideon's still out there." He pulled the makeshift barricade aside and stepped into the night, rifle ready. Mara followed, leaving Rosalie alone in the cabin with the bodies and the blood and the smell of gunpowder that filled every breath. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, strong enough that Rosalie had to sit down, had to breathe through it with both hands pressed against her belly. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please, not yet." But the baby had its own schedule. The contractions were maybe 30 minutes apart now, maybe less. Labor was coming whether she was ready or not. Outside she heard voices, Silas and someone else. Then a third voice joining, Gideon. Rosalie forced herself to stand, forced herself to the door. She had to see this, had to know how it ended. The moon had broken through the clouds, turning the canyon into a landscape of silver and shadow. Bodies lay in the snow, 4 of them, dark shapes that didn't move. And standing in the clearing between the cabin and the tree line were 3 figures, Silas and Mara on one side, Gideon on the other. "It's done," Gideon was saying, his voice carried clearly in the cold air. "Your men are dead or gone. Nobody's coming to save you. Just let me take her and this ends clean." "Nothing about this is clean," Silas replied. "Cleaner than what's coming if you don't." Gideon's hand rested on his gun belt. "Not drawing, not yet. I've got more men, more resources. I can come back tomorrow with 20 riders instead of 6. You ready for that? Are you?" The question hung between them. Gideon's jaw worked. "I don't want to kill you. Either of you. This isn't personal. It's business. The ranch is mine by right. That woman in there has no claim. She has a claim called survival," Mara cut in. "Which is more than your men have now. They made their choice. So did you when you threw her in that storm." Gideon's hand moved closer to his gun. "I'm trying to be reasonable here." "Reasonable," Silas's voice went flat. "You want reasonable? Here's reasonable. You leave now and don't come back. Ever. And maybe, I let you live." "You threatening me?" "I'm telling you how this ends. You walk away or you die. Those are your options." Gideon stared at him, and Rosalie could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Weighing risks, weighing chances, trying to find an angle that let him win. Then his hand dropped to his gun. Everything happened at once. Gideon drew. Silas was faster. The rifle came up and fired in one smooth motion, but Gideon had anticipated it, was already diving left. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder instead of the chest, spinning him around. Gideon's return shot went wild, disappearing into the night. Mara fired next, but Gideon was rolling, coming up behind a fallen log. Her bullet hit wood. Then there was a pause, all 3 of them in cover, breathing hard, waiting for the next move. "Should have taken the deal," Gideon called out. His voice was tight with pain. "Should have walked away while you could." "Funny," Silas replied. "I was thinking the same about you." Rosalie saw movement at the tree line, Gideon trying to flank, working his way around to get a better angle. She raised the rifle, aimed as carefully as her shaking hands allowed. The rifle cracked. Wood splintered near Gideon's head, and he jerked back into cover. "That you, Rosalie?" Gideon shouted. "You really want this? You want to spend the rest of your life running, looking over your shoulder? Better than being dead," she called back. Another contraction hit, and this time Rosalie couldn't hide it. She gasped, doubling over, the rifle falling from her hands. "She's in labor!" Gideon's voice rose with something that might have been triumph. "You hear that? She's having the baby right now. So what's your plan? Fight me while she's screaming? While that baby's coming?" Silas didn't respond, but Rosalie saw him look back at the cabin, saw the decision forming on his face. "Go," Mara said to him quietly. "I've got this." "You can't." I can. Been handling men like Gideon my whole life. He's nothing special. Mara's eyes were hard. That girl needs you more than I do, so go, before it's too late. Silas hesitated 1 second longer. Then he ran for the cabin, moving low and fast. Gideon saw him break cover, fired, missed, fired again. This time the bullet caught Silas in the side, just above the hip. He stumbled but didn't stop, hitting the cabin door and crashing inside. Silas! Rosalie reached for him, but another contraction seized her. This one was different, deeper, more insistent. The baby was coming, not in hours, in minutes. Help me to the bed, she gasped. Silas pressed his hand against the wound in his side, blood seeping between his fingers. I'm shot. I don't care. Help me. He half carried, half dragged her to the narrow bed. Outside, Rosalie could hear Mara and Gideon exchanging fire, could hear their voices raised in combat that had gone beyond reason into something primal. I need to check, Silas said. His face was pale. I need to see how far along. I know how far along. The baby's coming now. Silas swore. Then he moved to the door, barred it with what was left of the table, grabbed towels and water from the basin. His hands were shaking and blood was spreading across his shirt from the bullet wound. You need to stop bleeding, Rosalie said between contractions. So do you, probably, soon enough. He pressed a towel against his side, winced. Tell me what to do. I don't know. I've never done this before. Neither have I. They stared at each other, two people completely unprepared for what was coming. Then another contraction hit, stronger than anything before, and Rosalie screamed. Outside, the gunfire stopped, then started again, then stopped completely. Mara? Silas called. No answer. Mara? Still nothing. Then a voice from the darkness, Gideon's, ragged and furious. She's dead. You hear me? The old woman's dead. And you're next. Silas's face went white, not from the bullet wound, from something deeper. No, he whispered. No, she can't. Footsteps on the cabin's porch, heavy, determined. Gideon was coming. Silas grabbed his rifle, positioned himself between Rosalie and the door. Blood dripped from his side onto the floor, each drop marking time running out. The door shook as Gideon hit it. The makeshift barricade held, barely. Give her up, Gideon roared. Give her up and I'll let you live. No deal, Silas said. Another impact. The table shifted. Rosalie tried to sit up, tried to reach for the revolver on the bedside table, but her body wasn't responding. The baby was coming, and everything else had narrowed to that single imperative. Push. Breathe. Push again. Silas? She gasped. I can't. I need. He looked back at her, at the door, at the rifle in his hands, making impossible calculations. Then he did something Rosalie didn't expect. He set the rifle down, moved to the bed, started rolling up his sleeves even as blood continued to seep from his wound. What are you doing? She asked. What I should have done 7 years ago. His hands, red with his own blood, reached for hers. I'm not letting another woman die. Not today. Not ever again. The door exploded inward. Gideon stood there, silhouetted against the moonlight, gun in hand and fury written across every line of his face. Finally, he said. Then he saw Silas at the bedside, saw Rosalie in labor, saw the blood and the desperation. What? Silas moved, not toward his rifle, toward Gideon. The two men collided in the center of the cabin, grappling for the gun. They crashed into the table, sending it sliding, crashed into the wall, shaking the whole structure. The gun went off. Someone screamed. Rosalie couldn't see through the pain and the contractions and the overwhelming need to push. But she heard the thud of a body hitting the floor, heard rasping breath, heard footsteps staggering. Then Silas was back at her side, his face ashen, the gun in his hand now. There was new blood on him, not his own. He's down, Silas said. But he didn't finish, just set the gun aside and reached for her hands again. I need you to push, he said. Can you do that? Where's Gideon? Don't think about him. Think about the baby. Just the baby. So she did. She pushed with everything she had left, pushed through pain that felt like it would split her in half, pushed while Silas coached her with a voice that got weaker with every word. She pushed until the cabin filled with a sound she'd been terrified she'd never hear, a baby crying, not loud, not strong, but alive. "It's a girl," Silas said. His voice was barely a whisper now. "You've got a daughter." He lifted the baby, tiny and red and screaming, and placed her on Rosalie's chest. The warmth of that small body, the reality of it, hit Rosalie like a wave. "She's alive," Rosalie breathed. She's perfect." Silas was working on the cord with shaking hands, trying to tie it off. His movements were getting slower, clumsier. "She's going to be fine." "Silas, you're bleeding." "I know. You need to stop." "I know." But he kept working, kept making sure the baby was secure and clean and breathing properly. Only when he was satisfied did he finally sit back against the wall, his hand pressed against the bullet wound that had reopened during the fight with Gideon. Rosalie looked past him. Gideon lay near the door, not moving. There was blood, too much blood, spreading across the floor. "Is he—" "Yes." Silas closed his eyes. "He's gone." The baby cried again, and Rosalie held her closer. This tiny thing, this impossible thing, this child that shouldn't exist because Rosalie should have frozen to death in the mountains weeks ago. "What do I name her?" Rosalie asked. Silas opened his eyes. There was something in them, peace, maybe, or resignation. "Something fierce," he said. "Something that reminds her she's a survivor." Rosalie looked down at her daughter, at the tiny fists and the searching eyes, and the mouth that kept crying like it was angry at the world for making birth so hard. "Ember," she said, "after the fire that kept us alive." Silas smiled, actually smiled, for maybe the first time since she'd met him. "That's good," he said. "That's really good." Then his eyes closed and he slumped against the wall, unconscious but still breathing. Rosalie held her daughter and looked at the chaos around her. The broken door, the bodies, the blood. The man who'd saved her life passed out against the wall, maybe dying from wounds he'd taken protecting her. Outside, dawn was breaking. Gray light filtered through the shattered windows, and somewhere in the distance, birds were starting to sing. The war was over. They'd survived. Barely. The first thing Rosalie did after the baby stopped crying was check if Silas was still breathing. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely find his pulse, but it was there, weak and thready, but present. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage he'd pressed against his side, and his skin had gone the color of old snow. "Don't you die on me," she whispered, adjusting her hold on Ember with one arm while pressing harder against his wound with the other. "Not after everything. You don't get to save me just to die anyway." He didn't respond, didn't even twitch. Ember made a small noise, not quite a cry, more like a question. Rosalie looked down at her daughter's face, at eyes that were trying to focus, at a mouth working like it was searching for something. "I know," Rosalie said softly. "I'm scared too." The cabin was a disaster. Gideon's body lay near the door, eyes open and unseeing. The floor was slick with blood, some Silas's, some Gideon's, some probably hers from the birth. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Cold air poured in through bullet holes in the walls. And outside, somewhere in the snow, Mara was dead. Rosalie felt that loss like a physical blow. The woman who'd taught her to shoot, who'd shown her how to stand when the world wanted her on her knees, who'd died buying time for a stranger's baby to be born. But grief would have to wait. Survival couldn't. She needed help, needed someone who could stitch bullet wounds and knew how to keep newborns alive in mountain winters. She needed the trading post, she said aloud. Mara had mentioned it once, 3 miles down the canyon, where trappers and hunters gathered, where there might be someone with medical knowledge, but 3 miles might as well be 300. She'd just given birth. Silas was unconscious, and Ember was maybe an hour old. Still, there wasn't a choice. Rosalie wrapped Ember in the cleanest blanket she could find, tucking the tiny body against her chest. Then she grabbed towels and pressed them firmly against Silas's wound, wrapping them as tightly as she dared and tying them off. "I'm coming back," she told him. "I promise. Just hold on." She took one of the rifles, Mara's still warm from the night's fighting, and stepped out into the dawn. The cold hit her like a fist. She was weak, bleeding, exhausted beyond measure, but she forced her legs to move. One step, then another. Following the trail Gideon's men had used, the one that led down toward civilization. She'd gone maybe 50 yards when she found Mara. The older woman lay in the snow near the south ridge, her rifle still clutched in one hand. There was blood on her chest, a single shot, clean through the heart. She'd died fast, which was probably the only mercy in any of this. Rosalie stood over her for a moment, ember warm against her chest, and felt tears freeze on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she kept walking. Because that's what Mara would have wanted. That's what Mara had died to make possible. The trail down was treacherous. Snow hid roots and rocks. Her legs felt like water, threatening to give out with every step. Twice she had to stop and lean against trees, breathing through waves of dizziness and pain. Ember stayed mercifully quiet, as if she understood that silence meant survival. When Rosalie finally saw the trading post, a squat log building with smoke rising from its chimney, she wanted to weep with relief. But crying wouldn't get Silas the help he needed, so she swallowed it down and pushed forward. The door opened before she reached it. A grizzled man in his 50s stood there, coffee cup in hand, staring at the sight of her like she was a ghost. "Sweet mercy," he breathed. "What happened to you?" "I need help." Rosalie's voice came out hoarse. "There's a man, shot. He's dying, and there are bodies. I need... Come inside." The man, owner, Rosalie assumed, set down his cup and helped her through the door. The warmth of the interior made her dizzy. "Sit. Don't move." He disappeared into the back, shouting for someone named Catherine. A moment later, a woman appeared, younger than Mara but older than Rosalie, with capable hands and sharp eyes that took in the situation immediately. "How long since the birth?" Catherine asked, already examining Ember with practiced efficiency. "Maybe 2 hours. I don't know. Everything's blurred." "And the man who was shot?" 3 miles up the canyon. He's unconscious, lost a lot of blood." Catherine looked at the owner. "Get Doc Morrison. Tell him we need him at the North Ridge cabin. Fast." The man nodded and grabbed his coat. "There are bodies," Rosalie said again. She felt like she was repeating herself but couldn't remember what she'd already said. 6 men, maybe 7, and a woman, Mara Yates. She's... "I know Mara." Catherine's voice softened. "Was she fighting with you?" "For me. She died for me." Rosalie looked down at Ember. "For us." Catherine didn't say anything for a moment, then, "That sounds like Mara, stubborn until the end." She finished her examination of Ember. "Baby's healthy, small, but strong. She'll be fine. You, on the other hand, need rest and food and probably stitches. I need to get back to Silas." "You need to sit still before you bleed out on my floor." Catherine guided her to a chair. "Doc Morrison's the best within 50 miles. If your friend can be saved, he'll do it. But you running back up there won't help anyone." Rosalie wanted to argue, wanted to demand someone take her back immediately, but her body was done listening to her will. She sagged in the chair, Ember still clutched to her chest, and felt consciousness slipping. "Stay with me," Catherine said sharply. "I need you awake. Tell me what happened. All of it." So Rosalie did. Told her about Gideon throwing her into the storm, about Silas finding her, about Mara teaching her to shoot, about the attack last night and the gunfight, and the baby being born while men died outside. By the time she finished, 3 more people had gathered in the trading post, all listening with expressions ranging from horror to grim satisfaction. Gideon Mercer finally got what was coming. One of them, a trapper with tobacco-stained teeth, said, "Man's been pushing his weight around for years. Thought being a landowner made him untouchable." "He left a pregnant woman to die in a blizzard," another added. "That's murder, law or no law." "What about Silas Boone?" The trapper looked at Rosalie. "You know who he is? What he was?" "I know he saved my life. That's all that matters." "He rode with the Crow gang. Did you know that?" Rosalie met his eyes steadily. "I know he left them. I know he's been trying to make up for what he did. And I know he took a bullet protecting me and my daughter." The trapper studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Man's entitled to redemption if he's willing to bleed for it." Doc Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that moved with surgical precision. He examined Rosalie quickly, declared her stable enough, then headed up the canyon with 2 men carrying a stretcher. The wait was agony. Catherine tried to keep Rosalie distracted by teaching her how to nurse Ember, how to check for breathing problems, how to keep a newborn warm. But all Rosalie could think about was Silas lying in that cabin, bleeding into the floor. When Doc Morrison finally returned 3 hours later, Silas was on the stretcher, pale as death but breathing. "He alive?" Rosalie asked before the doctor even reached the door. "Barely. Bullet went clean through, which is good, but he lost a lot of blood and there's risk of infection." Morrison wiped his forehead. "Next 48 hours will tell. If he makes it that long, he's got a chance." They set up Silas in the trading post's back room, normally used for storage but cleared out to make space. Morrison worked on him for another hour, cleaning the wound, stitching, bandaging. Rosalie watched from the doorway, Ember asleep against her shoulder, and prayed to whatever force might be listening that Silas wouldn't die. On the third day, Silas opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Rosalie sitting beside the bed, Ember in her arms. "You're alive," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "So are you, barely. The baby?" "Healthy, strong. She's got her father's stubbornness." Silas tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "Thomas was stubborn?" "I meant you." That got him. Rosalie saw surprise flicker across his face, followed by something else, something that looked like hope, trying not to get caught. Hoping. "I'm not her father," he said quietly. "You delivered her. You fought for her. You almost died for her." Rosalie adjusted Ember in her arms. "Seems like father enough to me." Silas closed his eyes. "Mara?" "Dead. Single shot. It was fast." His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. After a moment, a single tear tracked down his scarred cheek. "She bought us time," Rosalie said softly. "She knew what she was doing. She chose it." "Doesn't make it easier." "No, it doesn't." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the trading post was busy with the usual commerce: trappers selling furs, miners buying supplies, travelers stopping for food and news. But in this small room, the world contracted to just the three of them. "What happens now?" Silas finally asked. "You heal. We figure out what comes next." "Gideon's dead, but the ranch is mine." Rosalie's voice was firm. "Thomas left it to his heir. I have his heir. The law's clear." "The law's only clear when people follow it." Gideon had friends, people who profited from him being in charge. "Let them come." "I'm done running." Silas opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her. Not the half-frozen woman he'd found in the snow, not the terrified widow learning to shoot, but someone new, someone hardened by what she'd survived. "You've changed," he said. "Had to. The old me would have died in that storm." Rosalie looked down at Ember. "This version gets to raise her daughter." Over the next 2 weeks, word of what happened in the canyon spread like fire through dry brush. Stories multiplied and morphed with each retelling. Some said Silas had killed 20 men single-handedly. Others claimed Rosalie had shot Gideon herself while in labor. A few insisted Mara Yates had taken out half of Gideon's men before finally falling. The truth was less dramatic, but more important. 6 of Gideon's hired men were dead. 2 had fled and disappeared into the territory, never to be seen again. Gideon Mercer himself lay dead in a cabin that was being repaired by the same trappers who used to fear crossing him. And most importantly, nobody seemed particularly upset about any of it. "Self-defense," the territorial marshal said when he finally arrived to investigate. He was a weathered man named Callahan who'd seen enough frontier justice to know when not to look too closely. "Woman protects herself from men trying to kill her. Man helps woman give birth while defending her from murder. That's not a crime. That's survival." "What about Silas's past?" Rosalie asked. They were sitting in the trading post, Ember sleeping in a makeshift crib nearby. "I heard he rode with outlaws." Callahan shrugged. "Heard that too. Also heard he left that life years ago. Also heard he just killed 6 men trying to murder a pregnant woman. Seems to me whatever debts he owed, he paid them in full. So he's free?" "Free as any of us are." Callahan stood. "But I'd suggest you both stay clear of trouble from here on. Luck runs out eventually, even for survivors." After he left, Rosalie found Silas outside, sitting on the trading post porch and watching the canyon. He was still weak, still moved carefully to avoid tearing his stitches. But he was alive. "Marshall says you're clear," Rosalie told him. "For now." "You don't believe it?" "I believe luck's temporary. Justice is whatever people decide it is on any given day. He looked at her. You should go back to the ranch. Claim what's yours before someone else tries. I will, soon. Why not now? Because I'm not leaving until you're strong enough to travel. Silas frowned. I'm not going to the ranch. Yes, you are. Rosalie, Ricky, I need help. The ranch is too big to run alone. I've got a newborn and no family, and a whole territory of people who think women can't own property. She sat beside him. I'm offering you a job. Partnership, actually. Work the land, help me rebuild, make sure nobody else tries what Gideon tried. I'm not a rancher. Neither am I. We'll figure it out. I'm better at killing than building. Then let's hope nobody makes you prove it. Rosalie shifted Ember in her arms. Look, you can say no. You can ride off into the mountains and live alone until you die of old age or bullets, but I'm asking you to stay. Help me give Ember a home worth growing up in. Silas was quiet for a long time, staring out at the canyon where so many had died. Why? He finally asked. Because you saved us. Because you deserve a second chance. Because Ember needs someone who'll teach her to survive, and you're the best teacher I know. Rosalie paused. And because I think you're tired of being alone. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough with something that might have been emotion. One condition. What? We bury Mara on the ranch. Give her a proper place. She earned it. Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. Deal. They shook on it. 2 survivors making a pact over the body of a third. The real fight, it turned out, came not from guns, but from lawyers. 3 weeks after the gunfight, a woman arrived at the trading post representing the Territorial Land Office. She was middle-aged, severe, and clearly accustomed to people doing what she said. Mrs. Mercer, she said, looking at Rosalie like something she'd found on her shoe. I'm Eleanor Pritchard. I'm here regarding the property dispute. There's no dispute. My husband left the ranch to his heir. I have his heir. You have a daughter. Pritchard's tone made it clear what she thought of that. The law specifies a male heir for property this size. The law says heir. It doesn't specify gender. Precedent does. In 17 similar cases across the territory, I don't care about 17 other cases. Rosalie stood, Ember in her arms. I care about this one. That ranch was built by my husband's hands and mine. We cleared that land, we built that house, we raised those cattle, and when my husband died, his brother tried to murder me to steal it. That's a serious accusation. That's a proven fact. Ask Marshal Callahan. Ask the 6 dead men in the canyon. Ask anyone in this trading post who watched me walk down that mountain covered in blood with a newborn baby. Pritchard's expression didn't change. Nevertheless, the law is whatever people with power say it is. Silas spoke from the doorway, where he'd been listening. And right now, that woman has the power. She survived what should have killed her. She fought when she should have died. And if you try to take that ranch from her, you'll find out exactly how much fight she has left. Pritchard looked at him with barely concealed disgust. And you are? Silas Boone. I'm her partner. The outlaw. Former outlaw. Currently the man who killed 6 people trying to murder her. You want to test whether I've reformed completely? Keep pushing. The threat hung in the air. Pritchard's jaw tightened. This isn't over. The territorial office will appeal. We'll take this to the capital if necessary. You do that, Rosalie said calmly. But until there's a ruling, I'm on that land, working it, living on it. And if anyone tries to remove me, they better bring more than paperwork. After Pritchard left, Rosalie sagged into a chair. That went well. She'll be back, Silas said. I know, but I meant what I said. I'm not giving up that ranch. Even if it means more fighting? Rosalie looked at Ember sleeping peacefully despite the tension in the room. Especially if it means more fighting. My daughter deserves to grow up somewhere that's hers, somewhere nobody can take from her. Silas nodded slowly. Then we better get back there. Start making it defensible. They left the trading post 2 days later. Doc Morrison declared Silas healed enough to travel, though he'd carry that bullet scar for the rest of his life. Catherine packed them supplies and gave Rosalie a crash course in caring for an infant. You'll be fine, Catherine said as they prepared to leave. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. Same thing, most days. Catherine handed her a bundle of cloth diapers. Strong is just fear that keeps moving forward. The ride back to the ranch took most of a day. Silas had procured a gentle mare for Rosalie and Ember, while he rode his bay gelding that had carried Rosalie out of the storm. The spring thaw had started, turning the trail to mud. When they finally crested the ridge and saw the ranch spread below them, Rosalie felt something complex knot in her chest. This place held joy and grief in equal measure. Thomas's laughter, Gideon's betrayal, everything that had led to the canyon and the gunfight and Ember's violent entrance into the world. Second thoughts? Silas asked, noticing her hesitation. 10th or 11th, probably. Rosalie urged the mare forward. But I'm not backing down now. The ranch was in rough shape. Gideon's remaining men had cleared out when word spread about his death, taking whatever they could carry. Fences needed mending. The house needed cleaning. The cattle had scattered across the property, but it was still standing, still theirs. I'll start with the barn, Silas said, surveying the damage. Get the horses settled, then we'll tackle the house. Together, Rosalie said. He looked at her. What? We tackle it together. That's how this works now. Partnership, remember? Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Together, then. They buried Mara 3 days later on a hill overlooking the ranch. The spot had a view of the canyon where she'd lived and died, and the mountains that had witnessed everything. Rosalie carved the marker herself, just Mara's name and the words, "She stood." Think she'd like it? Rosalie asked. Silas stood beside the grave, hat in hand. She'd say it was too sentimental, then she'd admit she was honored. I wish she could have seen this, seen us make it work. She did see it, just not the ending. Silas placed his hat back on his head. But she knew. Mara always knew how things would turn out. She just chose to fight anyway. As spring deepened into summer, the ranch slowly came back to life. Silas proved surprisingly good at ranching despite his claims otherwise. He could mend a fence, track lost cattle, and handle equipment with the same efficiency he'd handled guns. Rosalie managed the house and the books, keeping track of supplies and sales. Ember grew steadily, transitioning from the tiny red thing she'd been at birth into a baby who looked around with sharp, curious eyes. The territorial office sent 2 more representatives. Rosalie turned them both away with the same message. The ranch was hers, and they could appeal all they wanted, but she wasn't leaving. After the 3rd attempt, Eleanor Pritchard herself returned, but this time her approach was different. Mrs. Mercer, she said, standing on the porch. I've been reviewing the case. And I've concluded that pursuing this further would be a waste of everyone's time and resources. Pritchard's expression was sour, like the words physically pained her. The land office has decided to recognize your claim, conditional on maintaining the property and paying taxes. Rosalie felt something unlock in her chest. It's over? It's over. Pritchard turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I've never seen someone fight this hard for anything. Most women would have accepted the first offer and moved on. Most women didn't give birth during a gunfight. No, they didn't. Pritchard almost smiled. Good luck, Mrs. Mercer. You've earned it. After she left, Rosalie found Silas working in the barn. She didn't say anything, just stood there until he looked up. What? He asked. We won. The ranch is officially ours. He set down the tool he'd been holding. Ours? Partnership, remember? Half mine, half yours. I'll get the paperwork drawn up in town. Rosalie, I can't. You can, and you will. You bled for this place. You almost died for it. That makes it yours as much as mine. She crossed her arms. Besides, I need someone legal in case something happens to me. Someone who'll make sure Ember stays on this land. Silas looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, partners. They shook hands, scarred survivors making a home out of blood-stained ground. That night, while Ember slept in the crib Silas had built, Rosalie stood on the porch and looked out at the ranch. The same view Gideon must have looked at when he'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble of letting live. But she was alive. Ember was alive. And the Mercer name, her name now, earned through survival rather than marriage, would continue. Not because the law said so, not because men allowed it, but because she'd refused to die when dying would have been easier. And in the end, that refusal had been enough. The years didn't pass smoothly. Anyone expecting a fairy tale ending would have been disappointed by the reality of what came after the gunfight. The ranch demanded everything from them: sweat, blood, sleepless nights, and a kind of stubborn persistence that wore down even the hardest spirits. Ember's first word was no, which seemed appropriate for a child born in the middle of violence. Her second word was Silas, which made the scarred man go quiet for a full minute before excusing himself to work on a fence that didn't need mending. "She thinks you're her father," Rosalie said that evening while they ate dinner at the table Silas had repaired after the gunfight. "I'm not. You're the only one she's ever known." Silas pushed food around his plate. "Thomas was her father. That doesn't change." "No, it doesn't. But you're raising her. That makes you something, even if we don't have a word for it." "Partner," Silas said after a moment. "That's the word. Your partner in this ranch, in raising her, in all of it." Rosalie studied him across the table. 3 years had passed since the night Ember was born, and Silas still carried himself like a man expecting trouble. But the hard edges had softened slightly. He smiled sometimes now, not often, but enough that when it happened, it felt earned. "Partner works," Rosalie agreed. The ranch grew slowly. They started with 30 head of cattle that first year, lost 7 to winter and predators, but gained 15 calves in the spring. The math was brutal but honest. Nothing came easy, but everything they earned stayed theirs. Travelers started stopping by, drawn by stories of what happened in the canyon. Most were just curious, wanting to see the place where a pregnant woman had survived a blizzard and a gunfight in the same week. But some came looking for work, and Rosalie learned to separate the genuine from the opportunistic. She hired 3 men that second summer, ranch hands who'd worked other properties and knew cattle. They treated her with cautious respect at first, waiting to see if she'd fold under pressure. When she didn't, when she proved she could make hard decisions and stick to them, the respect became genuine. Silas handled the ones who didn't respect her. He never had to do much, just appear at the right moment, scarred face impassive, and let his reputation do the talking. Word had spread about the outlaw who'd defended a widow against 6 men, about the bodies left in the snow, about the scars he carried from fighting when surrender would have been easier. Most troublemakers took one look at him and decided their business was elsewhere, but not all of them. The problem started in Ember's 4th year when a man named Dutch Keller arrived claiming to be one of Gideon's creditors. He was a banker from the territorial capital, soft hands, expensive suit, and the kind of smile that promised trouble. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, standing in the ranch house parlor like he owned it. "I'm here about the outstanding debts your brother-in-law left behind." "Gideon's debts aren't mine," Rosalie said. She was nursing a cup of coffee, Ember playing with wooden blocks on the floor nearby. "Actually, they are. When he died, his obligations transferred to the estate, which you now control." Keller pulled out papers. $3,000 plus interest, overdue by 17 months. Rosalie's stomach dropped. $3,000 was more than the ranch had made in 3 years combined. "I don't have that kind of money." "Then I'm afraid I'll have to foreclose on the property." "Like hell you will." Silas stepped into the room, and Keller's confidence faltered slightly. "This is a legal matter," Keller said, recovering. "Not one that requires whatever it is you do." "I keep people from stealing what isn't theirs." Silas crossed his arms. "Show me the paperwork." Keller handed it over with obvious reluctance. Silas studied it for several minutes, his scarred face unreadable. Then he handed it back. "This is dated 2 months before Gideon died. He signed it himself." Silas looked at Rosalie. "You didn't co-sign anything?" "No, I never even knew about it." "Then it's Gideon's debt, not yours. When he died, it died with him." Keller's smile went cold. "That's not how territorial law works. Community property means she inherited property, not debt, especially not debt she didn't agree to." Silas stepped closer. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to go back to the capital, and you're going to tell whoever sent you that this ranch isn't available for foreclosure." "Or what?" "Or I'll make sure you don't make it back to the capital." The threat hung between them like smoke. Keller's face went pale. "You're threatening me. In front of witnesses. I'm telling you facts. What you do with them is your choice." Silas opened the front door. "Now get out." After Keller left, Rosalie let out a breath she'd been holding. "He'll be back. With the law, or worse? Probably. Silas closed the door. But we've got time to figure out our next move. What next move? If that debt is real, it's real. But debts can be fought in court, and courts take time. He looked at her steadily. We've survived worse than a banker with paperwork. Ember looked up from her blocks. Bad man? Gone now, Rosalie told her daughter. Nothing to worry about. But that night, after Ember was asleep, Rosalie sat at the kitchen table and went through every piece of financial documentation she could find. The ranch was profitable, barely, but $3,000 might as well have been $300,000. We could sell some land, Silas suggested. He was cleaning his rifle, a habit he'd never broken. No, we fought for this land. I'm not giving pieces of it away. Then we fight Keller, take it to court. With what money? Lawyers cost more than we have. They sat in frustrated silence. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance, and somewhere on the property, cattle moved through the darkness. There's another option, Silas said quietly. What? I could leave, take the debt with me. If I'm not here, they can't use my past as leverage against you. Rosalie looked at him sharply. That's the stupidest thing you've ever said. It's practical. It's you running again. And I won't let you. She stood pacing. We're partners. That means we face problems together, not alone. Even when facing them together might cost you everything. Especially then. The court hearing happened 6 weeks later in the territorial capital. Rosalie had never been to a city that size. Buildings 3 stories tall, streets packed with people and horses and wagons. It was overwhelming and foreign, and she hated every minute of it. The courtroom was worse. High ceilings, dark wood, a judge who looked at her like she was something dragged in from the wilderness, which she supposed she was. Dutch Keller had 3 lawyers. Rosalie had herself and a young attorney named Marcus Wells, who'd agreed to take the case for 20% of whatever they saved. Not confident in our chances? Rosalie had asked when they discussed payment. I'm confident you've got a case, Wells had replied, but I've also seen how courts treat women claiming property rights. It's not pretty. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Keller's lawyers argued that community property law meant Rosalie had inherited all of Gideon's obligations along with the ranch. That debt couldn't be selectively refused. That the law was clear. Wells argued that Rosalie had never been married to Gideon, had never co-signed the loan, and couldn't be held responsible for debts incurred by someone who'd tried to murder her. Your Honor, Wells said during his closing argument, my client was thrown into a blizzard by the man who took this loan. She was left to die specifically so he could claim property that wasn't his. She survived, defended herself and her newborn child in a gunfight, and has spent 4 years building that property into something profitable. Now Mr. Keller wants to take it from her using the debts of her attempted murderer. That's not justice. That's grave robbery. The judge, a weathered man named Patterson, who looked like he'd heard everything, studied Rosalie for a long moment. Mrs. Mercer, he said, stand up. She did, heart hammering. You're the woman from the canyon incident, the one who survived Gideon Mercer's attempt on your life. Yes, Your Honor. And you've been running that ranch for 4 years without your brother-in-law's help. With my partner's help? Yes. Partner. Patterson's eyebrow rose. That would be Silas Boone, the former outlaw. Former, Rosalie emphasized. He left that life years ago. So I've heard. Also heard he killed 6 men defending you and your daughter. Patterson shuffled papers. That true? Yes, Your Honor. They came to kill us. He stopped them. And now Mr. Keller wants to use debt as a weapon where bullets failed. Patterson looked at Keller's lawyers. Seems like a pattern. One of the lawyers stood. Your Honor, the law... I know what the law says. Patterson cut him off. I also know what justice looks like. And this isn't it. He banged his gavel. Debt is ruled void. Mrs. Mercer inherits property only, not obligations incurred by a deceased party who was actively trying to harm her. Case dismissed. Rosalie felt her knees go weak. Wells caught her elbow, grinning. We won, he said. You actually won. Outside the courthouse, Keller was waiting. His face was tight with fury. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. Rosalie faced him squarely. And if you come after me or my ranch again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. The kind who uses debt as a weapon against women and children. You think anyone will care? I think enough people will care. Especially once they hear how you tried to steal land from a widow who survived a murder attempt. She stepped closer. I've already died twice and came back both times. You really want to test whether I can do it a third? Keller's confidence cracked. He turned and walked away without another word. On the ride back to the ranch, Rosalie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Actual, genuine relief. The threat was gone. The debt was void. The ranch was truly, legally, permanently theirs. "We did it," she said to Silas as they crested the ridge and saw the property spread below them. "You did it. I just came along for the ride." "Liar. You've been fighting for this place since the day you found me." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, "I wasn't fighting for the place. I was fighting for you." Rosalie looked at him, but he was already urging his horse forward, avoiding whatever moment might have happened. Some things, she'd learned, didn't need to be said out loud to be understood. The ranch flourished over the next 6 years. They hired more hands, expanded the herd, built a new barn, and repaired the house until it looked less like a battlefield and more like a home. Ember grew like a weed, all sharp edges and fierce questions. "Why did my father die?" she asked one evening when she was 7. Rosalie and Silas exchanged glances across the dinner table. "Because life's dangerous," Rosalie said carefully. "And sometimes dangerous things happen even to good people. But you didn't die, and you were in danger. I was lucky. I had help." Rosalie nodded toward Silas. "And I refused to give up." Ember absorbed this with the seriousness of someone much older. "If I refuse to give up, will I not die too?" "Eventually everyone dies," Silas said, "but refusing to give up means you get to choose how you live until then." "Did you give up?" "Once? Long time ago?" Silas set down his fork. "That's how I learned it was a mistake." "What changed?" "I found something worth not giving up for." Ember considered this. Then, "Was it us?" Silas didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rougher than usual. "Yeah, it was you." By the time Ember turned 10, she could ride better than most ranch hands, shoot accurately enough to hunt small game, and argue with the stubbornness of someone who'd inherited her mother's refusal to back down. She was also curious about things that made both Rosalie and Silas uncomfortable. "People in town talked about what happened," Ember said one afternoon while helping Silas mend a fence. "About the night I was born. People always talk. They say you killed 6 men, by yourself. I had help. Your mother shot one. Mara got another. But mostly you." Silas hammered a nail, not looking at her. "What's your question, Ember?" "Were you scared?" That made him pause. "Yes, but you fought anyway. Because not fighting meant you and your mother died, so being scared didn't matter." Ember was quiet while she handed him another nail. Then, "I'm glad you were scared and fought anyway. Otherwise I wouldn't be here." "Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Do you ever regret it? Staying with us instead of going back to your mountain cabin?" Silas looked at her then, this fierce girl with her mother's determination and something uniquely her own. "Not once." "Good. Because you're stuck with us now." "Seems like it." They worked in comfortable silence after that, the kind of silence that only came from years of trust and shared survival. That spring brought the last real threat to their peace. A group of men arrived claiming to represent Thomas Mercer's extended family, cousins from back east who'd heard about the ranch and decided they had rights to it. "You're not even a Mercer by blood," their lawyer said. He was a weaselly man with spectacles and a briefcase. "You married in. The property should go to actual family." "I am actual family," Rosalie said coldly. "I was Thomas's wife. I carry his child. That makes me more family than cousins who never bothered to visit when he was alive." "Nevertheless, the law already decided this 4 years ago, when Judge Patterson ruled the ranch was mine." She stood. "So unless you've got a judge willing to overturn that ruling, get off my property. We'll be back with proper documentation. Bring whatever you want. The answer is still no." But this time, Rosalie didn't wait for them to return. She rode to town the next day and hired Marcus Wells again. "I want you to bury this," she told him. Paperwork, precedent, whatever it takes. I want it so clear that this ranch is mine that nobody ever questions it again." Wells nodded. "That's going to take time and money. I have both. What I don't have is patience for people trying to steal what I've bled for." The legal battle took 8 months. Wells filed counterclaims, dug up territorial statutes, and found 17 precedents supporting Rosalie's ownership. When the cousin's lawyer tried to argue Thomas's blood relatives had superior claim, Wells brought witness after witness who testified about Gideon's attempt on Rosalie's life and her years of successful ranch management. The final ruling came from a territorial appellate court and was unambiguous. Rosalie Mercer had absolute ownership of the property. No future claims based on blood relation would be entertained. The matter was settled permanently. "That's it," Wells said, showing her the documentation. "It's over, really over this time." Rosalie held the papers and felt a weight she'd been carrying for 10 years finally lift. "Thank you," she said. "Thank yourself. You're the one who wouldn't quit." That night, Rosalie gathered Silas and Ember in the main room. She held up the court documents. "What's that?" Ember asked. "This is proof that nobody can ever take this ranch from us. Not family, not banks, not anyone." Rosalie set the papers on the table. "This place is ours, forever." Ember grinned. "Good. I didn't want to move anyway." Silas just nodded, but there was something in his expression that might have been relief, or pride, or the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd fought for something and actually won. "There's one more thing," Rosalie said. She pulled out another set of documents. "These are partnership papers, making it official that this ranch belongs to both of us equally, 50-50. Silas stared at them. "Rosalie, don't argue. We've been partners for 10 years. Time to make the law recognize what's already true. I'm not family." "Yes, you are," Ember spoke up. "You've been here my whole life. That makes you family." "She's right," Rosalie said. "Blood doesn't make family. Survival does. Fighting for each other does. Staying when leaving would be easier does. You're family, Silas, whether you like it or not." He looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he signed them without another word. The years continued their march forward, as years do. The ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful independent operations, proof that hard work and stubbornness could carve out something permanent, even in brutal conditions. People stopped talking about the gunfight eventually, though the story never quite died. It became one of those legends people told around fires, embellished and reshaped until the truth was buried under layers of myth. Some versions had Silas killing 20 men single-handedly. Others claimed Rosalie had shot Gideon herself while in labor. A few insisted Mara Yates had survived and still lived in the mountains, a ghost watching over the canyon. The truth was simpler and somehow more powerful. A woman had refused to die. A man had found redemption protecting her. And together they'd built something that lasted. When Ember turned 16, she started asking questions about leaving the ranch. Not forever, but to see what else existed beyond the mountains. "I want to go to school," she said. "Real school. In a city." Rosalie felt her heart clench. "Why?" "Because I want to learn things you can't teach me here. I want to see places that aren't covered in cattle and dust." Ember looked between her mother and Silas. "But I'd come back. This is home. I just want to know what else is out there." "What do you think?" Rosalie asked Silas later, after Ember had gone to bed. "I think she's smart enough to handle herself anywhere, and curious enough that keeping her here might kill what makes her special. I don't want her to leave." "I know, but we can't protect her forever." Silas stared into the fire. "Best we can do is teach her to protect herself and trust she'll come back." So they let her go. Ember left for school in the territorial capital that fall, and the ranch felt emptier without her fierce presence. But she came back for visits, told them about books and teachers and ideas that made Rosalie's head spin, and every time she left again, she promised to return for good someday. "This place is in my blood," Ember said during one visit when she was 19. "I'll finish school, maybe work somewhere else for a while, but eventually I'll come home." "Why?" Rosalie asked. "You could build anything anywhere." "Because this ranch is proof that refusing to give up matters. Because you survived things that should have killed you and built something beautiful anyway." Ember smiled. "And because someday I want to teach my kids what you taught me, that being afraid doesn't mean being weak. It means being human." And humans get to choose whether fear stops them or drives them forward. Rosalie felt tears in her eyes. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers. 20 years after the gunfight, the canyon had transformed into something unrecognizable from the killing field it had been. The ranch thrived. The trading post expanded into a small town, and people came from across the territory to see the place where legends had been born. Rosalie was in her late 40s now, gray threading through her hair and lines marking her face from years of sun and wind. Silas had aged into his 60s, moving slower but still formidable enough that nobody questioned his authority. And Ember, now 24 and returned from school with a degree in literature and fierce opinions about everything, was learning to run the ranch operations alongside them. One evening in early spring, neighbors gathered for a celebration. It had become tradition. Every year on the anniversary of Ember's birth, they lit a massive bonfire and remembered the ones who hadn't made it. Travelers and ranch hands and town folk filled the canyon with laughter and music. Children ran between the adults, playing games in the firelight. Somewhere, someone was singing. A young traveler, maybe 20, with eager eyes and too many questions, approached Silas where he sat near the fire. "Is it true?" the traveler asked. "What they say about you? About the gunfight?" Silas took a long drink before answering. "Depends what they say. That you killed 6 men in one night, that you defended a woman giving birth, that you were some kind of hero. Wasn't a hero. Was just a man who didn't want to see someone else die because I was too scared to act." "But you weren't scared." "I was terrified. Being scared doesn't make you a coward. Running does. I was too tired to run anymore." The traveler looked confused, like he'd expected something more dramatic. Silas gestured toward Rosalie, who was holding someone's baby and laughing at something Ember had said. "You want to know the real story? That woman there survived betrayal, winter, childbirth, and a gunfight. Lost everything and built it back better than before. Raised a daughter who's smarter than both of us combined. That's the story worth telling. But you're part of it. I'm a footnote. She's the whole book." The traveler seemed disappointed, but wandered off to pester someone else with questions. Ember came over and sat beside Silas. "Still deflecting credit? Still telling the truth? You know people are going to tell your version anyway. The mysterious outlaw who found redemption protecting a widow. It's a better story. It's not the right story." "Then what is?" Silas looked at the fire, at the people gathered around it, at the life they'd all built from blood and stubbornness. "The right story is that people can change, that past mistakes don't define you forever, that sometimes the worst moments become the foundation for something better." He looked at Ember. "Your mother taught me that, just by refusing to die when dying would have been easier. She's pretty stubborn. Runs in the family." Ember smiled. "You know I'm taking over the ranch someday, right? You and Mom can't run it forever." "I know. And when I do, I'm going to tell the real story. Not the legend. The actual truth about what happened." She watched the fire. People deserve to know it wasn't some romantic tale. It was survival. Messy and terrifying and real. "They won't believe you." "Probably not. But I'll tell it anyway." Later that night, after most people had left and the fire had burned down to coals, Rosalie and Silas stood together watching the last embers fade. "You ever regret it?" Rosalie asked. "Saving me that day in the snow? That's a stupid question. Humor me." Silas was quiet for a long time. "I regret a lot of things. The men I killed before I met you. The woman I couldn't save in Bitter Creek. The years I wasted hiding in a cabin thinking I didn't deserve anything better." He looked at her. "But finding you, staying, building this, those aren't regrets. Those are the only good decisions I've made in my whole life. We made them together." "Yeah, we did." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the canyon that had witnessed so much death transform into a place where life thrived. "I'm getting old," Silas said eventually. "Won't be able to help much longer." "You're not that old?" "Old enough and tired enough." He smiled slightly. "But I'll stay as long as I'm useful." "You'll stay because this is home, and because Ember would never forgive you for leaving. She's tough. She'd survive." "Surviving isn't the same as thriving. You taught me that." Rosalie took his hand, something she rarely did, both of them too practical for much affection. "Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For staying. for being family when I had none. Silas squeezed her hand once. You saved yourself. I just helped. We saved each other. Yeah, I guess we did. They stood together as the last light faded from the fire, two survivors watching over the legacy they'd built from ashes and blood and stubborn refusal to accept the death others had planned for them. In the years that followed, the story continued as stories do. Ember took over the ranch when Rosalie's health began to fail, running it with the same fierce determination her mother had shown. Silas lived long enough to see great-grandchildren born on the property, died peacefully in his sleep at 73, and was buried next to Mara on the hill overlooking the canyon. Rosalie followed him 2 years later. Her last words to Ember were simple. Tell them I lived. That's the only part that matters. And Ember did tell them. Told anyone who'd listen about the woman who'd been thrown into a storm pregnant and alone, who'd survived through sheer will and the help of a scarred stranger. Told them about the gunfight and the birth and the years of fighting to keep what was rightfully hers. The legend grew. People wrote songs about it. Painters tried to capture the moment Silas had found Rosalie in the snow. Writers crafted elaborate versions where heroes never bled and victories came without cost. But Ember always corrected them, always insisted on the truth that her mother had been terrified, that Silas had been wounded and exhausted, that Mara had died for people she barely knew, that survival wasn't beautiful, it was ugly and desperate, and fueled by nothing more than refusal to accept death. That's the lesson, Ember would say when telling the story, not that heroes exist, but that ordinary people become extraordinary when they refuse to break. My mother was just a woman. Silas was just a man trying to make up for mistakes. Mara was just a widow who understood what being alone meant. None of them were special. They just chose not to give up. The ranch continued for generations after that. Ember's children ran it, then their children, each adding their own chapters to the story. The canyon where so many had died became a symbol not of violence, but of resilience. And on quiet nights when the wind blew right, people swore they could still hear echoes, not of gunfire, not of screams, but of a baby crying, that first breath announcing life's victory over death, announcing that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, survival wins. That's what mattered in the end. Not the blood that was spilled or the bodies that fell. Not even the ranch that was built or the family that thrived. What mattered was that a woman who should have died in a blizzard chose to keep crawling forward. That a man haunted by past failures chose to act instead of hide. That another woman chose to stand beside them even knowing it might cost her life. What mattered was the choice, the refusal, the stubborn, impossible insistence that their story didn't end in the snow. And because they made that choice, because they refused to let winter and violence and men with guns write their ending, a legacy was born that outlasted all of them. Not a legacy of perfection or heroism, but of human beings facing impossible odds and deciding those odds didn't matter. Of fear transformed into action, of weakness becoming strength not through magic, but through the simple, brutal act of continuing when stopping would be easier. That's the story worth telling, not the legend, the truth. That sometimes the greatest act of courage is just refusing to die when dying would be so much simpler than living. And that survival, real survival, isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to fight anyway. That's what Rosalie taught the canyon. What Silas learned protecting her, what Mara knew all along, and what Ember carried forward into a future her mother had bled to make possible. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.